Right now, there is someone, maybe you, who has rehearsed an argument with a person who never said a word. Someone who has lived out a revenge fantasy so vividly they could describe the lighting in the room. Someone who has had the most meaningful conversation of their life with absolutely no one. And here's what no one tells you about that. It isn't weakness. It isn't laziness. It is your brain executing a survival program so sophisticated, most neuroscientists are still trying to reverse engineer it. But here's the dangerous part: that program wasn't built to make you happy. It was built to keep you comfortable. And comfort, when left unchecked, will quietly steal everything you were supposed to become. Your brain is not on your side. I know that sounds wrong. I know everything you've been told suggests the opposite, that your mind is your greatest asset, your most loyal companion, the one thing in this world that is entirely, unconditionally yours. But the moment you understand what your brain is actually optimized for, everything changes. Because your brain was never built to make you successful. It was never built to make you brave, or disciplined, or extraordinary. It was built for one thing, and one thing only: to keep you alive. And in the modern world, that single obsession has become your biggest enemy. Here is what happens inside your mind when life gets uncomfortable. When a conversation feels too risky. When a goal feels too distant. When reality carries too much friction. Your brain scans the environment, detects the discomfort, and immediately begins constructing an alternative. A scenario, a simulation, a private theater inside your skull where you are the writer, the director, the lead actor, and the audience all at once. And inside that theater, everything goes the way you need it to go. You say the perfect thing. You win the argument. You get the apology. You deliver the speech that changes everything. You live the life that is just slightly out of reach in the real world. And your brain does not just allow this, it rewards it. This is the trap. Not the fantasy itself, but the reward attached to it. When you imagine a scenario vividly enough, your brain releases dopamine. The same neurochemical that fires when you actually achieve something fires when you simply imagine achieving it. Your nervous system cannot fully distinguish between a real victory and a rehearsed one. Which means every time you retreat into a fake scenario, your brain registers something close to satisfaction. The pressure drops. The tension releases. The discomfort that was pushing you toward real action dissolves because your brain believes, on a chemical level, that the action has already been taken, that the problem has already been solved, that the threat has already been handled. And so you never move, you never speak, you never build, you never confront, because on the inside, you already did. On the inside, it already happened. Your brain collected the reward without paying the price, and it will do this every single time you let it, because this is not a flaw in your psychology, this is a feature. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. Conserve energy, minimize risk, manufacture enough relief to keep you functional without ever pushing you into the dangerous, unpredictable, uncontrollable territory of real life. Now understand what this means at scale. This is not about one daydream. This is not about occasionally imagining how a difficult conversation might go. This is about a pattern that, over month, NTHS in years, restructures the way you relate to reality itself. Every time your brain successfully substitutes a fake scenario for real action, it reinforces the pathway. It makes the substitution faster next time, easier, more automatic, until eventually you are not choosing to imagine anymore, the imagination is choosing itself. The moment discomfort appears, the theater opens. The moment uncertainty arrives, the simulation begins. You don't decide to escape. You are already gone before you realize you were leaving. And here is what makes this particularly invisible: the people caught deepest in this pattern are often the most intelligent, the most emotionally complex, the most sensitive to nuance. Because the brain constructs these scenarios using real memories, real emotions, real social intelligence. It takes everything remarkable about your mind and feeds it into a machine that produces absolutely nothing. All that processing power, all that emotional depth, all that creativity and self-awareness running at full capacity, consuming real time and real energy, generating zero results in the external world. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are extraordinarily able, and your brain has found a way to use that capability against you. The comfort trap is not comfortable because it feels good. It is comfortable because it feels real enough. And real enough for a brain trying to survive is always going to feel like enough. There is a molecule inside your brain that does not care about the truth. It does not check whether what you are experiencing is real or constructed, whether what you are feeling is earned or borrowed. Whether the victory you are tasting actually happened or simply played out behind your closed eyes in the silence of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, it fires regardless. It rewards regardless. And once you understand what that molecule is doing to you, not for you, but to you, you will never look at your own imagination the same way again. The molecule is dopamine, and everything you think you know about it is probably incomplete. Most people have been told that dopamine is the pleasure chemical, that it releases when something good happens, that it is the brain's way of saying, well done, you earned this, here is your reward. And that is partially true. But the deeper truth, the one that explains why intelligent, capable, emotionally aware people can spend years living inside their own heads instead of their actual lives, is that dopamine is not a reward signal. It is an anticipation signal. It fires not when you receive something, but when your brain predicts that something valuable is coming. It fires on the approach, not the arrival. It fires on the imagination of the outcome, not the outcome itself. This is why the fantasy feels so convincing. This is why sitting in a chair and imagining a confrontation, a success, a transformation, a conversation that has never happened can feel genuinely satisfying on a physiological level. Because your brain is not watching the simulation passively. It is participating in it. It is generating real neurochemical output in response to imagined input. The emotions you feel inside the fake scenario are not fake emotions. They are real emotional responses to a constructed stimulus, and your body processes them with the same biological machinery it would use to process something that actually occurred. Researchers have demonstrated this across decades of neuroscientific study. When a person vividly imagines performing a physical action, the motor cortex A activates in patterns nearly identical to those produced during actual movement. When a person imagines a social interaction with enough emotional detail, the same regions responsible for processing real social experience become engaged. The brain is not watching a movie. The brain is inside the movie, treating the constructed environment as data worth responding to, worth chemically encoding, worth filing into memory alongside things that genuinely happened. Now take that biological reality and apply it to the person who spends 40 minutes every morning imagining how they will finally confront the colleague who disrespects them. Or the person who replays a fantasy of quitting their job and launching something of their own, feeling the rush of that imagined freedom so completely that by the time they arrive at the office, they are somehow both energized and exhausted. Or the person who rehearses a difficult conversation so many times with so many variations that they have emotionally processed an event that never took place and will now be slightly less motivated to make it take place because some part of the nervous system believes the processing is already complete. This is the neurochemistry working against you in real time. The dopamine that was designed to pull you toward real action is being intercepted by the imagination and spent inside a simulation. You are burning the fuel before the engine starts. You are consuming the reward before doing the work that was supposed to generate it. And because the brain is fundamentally a pattern recognition and energy conservation system, it learns from this. It begins to recognize that the imagination is a faster, cheaper, lower-risk source of dopamine than actual engagement with the world. Real action requires uncertainty. Real action requires exposure. Real action carries the genuine possibility of failure, rejection, and pain. The imagination carries none of those costs. It is dopamine on demand, available instantly, with no consequences and no vulnerability required. And the brain, optimizing ruthlessly for efficiency, begins to prefer it. Not because you are weak, not because you lack ambition or desire or the genuine hunger for something more, but because you are running on biological hardware that was never updated to account for the fact that the human imagination would one day become sophisticated enough to convincingly impersonate reality at a neurochemical level. The fantasy does not feel like an escape. It feels like preparation. It feels like processing. It feels, in the most literal physiological sense, like progress. There is a version of you that has never done anything, never taken the risk, never had the conversation, never built the thing, never made the move. But that version of you has lived an extraordinarily full life inside your head, in the accumulated hours of imagined victories, and rehearsed transformations and simulated futures that felt so real, so detailed, so emotionally complete that your nervous system filed them alongside actual memory. And the terrifying thing is not that this version exists. The terrifying thing is that over time, without you noticing, without any single dramatic moment of surrender, this version begins to replace the real one. This is identity erosion, and it does not happen the way people expect it to. Most people imagine psychological deterioration as something loud, something visible, a breakdown, a collapse, a moment where everything falls apart and the damage becomes undeniable. But identity erosion through chronic FANT is nothing like that. It is quiet. It is gradual. It operates in the background of an otherwise normal life, making no noise, demanding no attention, leaving no obvious evidence. You still wake up. You still go through the motions. You still present the same face to the world. But underneath that surface, something is being slowly rewritten. The gap between who you actually are and who you have been pretending to be inside the privacy of your own imagination begins to widen. And every day that gap is not closed, it becomes slightly more permanent. Here is the mechanism. Identity is not a fixed thing you are born with and carry unchanged through your life. Identity is a living structure, constantly being shaped by the choices you make, the actions you take, the moments where you met difficulty and either moved through it or retreated from it. Every time you do something that requires courage, your brain updates its model of who you are. Every time you follow through on something uncomfortable, your self-concept shifts incrementally towards someone who does that. Every time you engage honestly with reality, even when reality is painful, your identity becomes slightly more grounded, slightly more solid, slightly more yours. But the reverse is equally true. Every time you substitute a fake scenario for real action, your brain still updates. It still files the experience. It still draws conclusions about who you are and what you are capable of. And the conclusion it draws, quietly and without announcement, is that you are someone who imagines rather than acts, someone who processes inside rather than engages outside, someone for whom the internal world is safer, more rewarding, and more real than the external one. And the more consistently that conclusion is reinforced, the more deeply it becomes embedded in the architecture of your self-concept until it stops feeling like a behavior and starts feeling like a personality trait. Until it stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are. This is the moment the erosion becomes structural. Because once the imagination becomes identity, the stakes of changing it become enormous. To stop retreating into fantasy would no longer feel like changing a habit, it would feel like losing yourself. It would feel threatening at a foundational level, the way any challenge to core identity feels threatening, because the brain is wired to protect its model of who you are with the same ferocity it uses to protect your physical survival. The very system that was supposed to serve your growth has now organized itself around the task of preventing it. And layered underneath all of this is something even more corrosive. When you spend years living a rich, detailed, emotionally satisfying life inside your imagination, your tolerance for the friction of real life decreases. Reality is slow. Reality is unpredictable. Reality does not respond to your script. Real people do not say the things you needed them to say. Real outcomes do not arrive on the timeline you imagined. Real progress is unglamorous and incremental and full of moments where nothing feels like enough. And when your nervous system has been conditioned by thousands of hours of frictionless internal experience, the ordinary resistance of real life begins to feel unbearable by comparison. Not difficult, not challenging, unbearable. Because the contrast is too sharp. Because the imagination has set a standard of responsiveness that reality can never meet. So you return to the theater, and the person you were supped goes to become weights outside in the real world, in the friction and the uncertainty and the beautiful, brutal incompleteness of actual experience, slowly becoming a stranger to you. Nobody builds a prison and calls it a prison. They call it a sanctuary. They decorate it carefully, fill it with familiar comforts, arrange everything exactly the way they need it to be. And then they spend so much time inside it that eventually the walls stop feeling like walls. They feel like home. This is what the human mind does with fantasy. It does not present the escape as an escape. It presents it as preparation, as processing, as emotional intelligence, as the reasonable, responsible act of a thoughtful person who simply needs to think things through before acting. And by the time you recognize what has actually been constructed inside your psychology, the architecture is already load-bearing. The avoidance has already become structural. Remove it, and something feels like it might collapse. This is not an accident. This is by design, not a conscious design, not a malicious one, but a biological one. executed with the quiet precision of a system that has been refining itself for hundreds of thousands of years. The avoidance architecture is not built overnight. It is assembled piece by piece, scenario by scenario, retreat by retreat, each individual instance feeling so justified, so reasonable, so psychologically legitimate that no single moment ever feels like the moment you made the choice to stop engaging with your life. Understand what avoidance actually is at its core. It is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is not a character defect or a moral failure. Avoidance is a pain management strategy. It is the mind's response to a perceived threat, and the imagination is the most sophisticated pain management tool the human brain has ever developed. When reality presents something that carries the emotional signature of danger rejection, it can be challenging to navigate. Failure, humiliation, loss, conflict, uncertainty. The nervous system triggers a withdrawal response. And if the imagination is available as an alternative environment, one where the threat can be engaged with safely, where the outcome can be controlled, where the pain can be simulated at a manageable intensity rather than experienced at full force, the brain will route the energy there instead of forward into actual engagement. What makes this particularly sophisticated is that the imagination does not simply help you avoid the threat. It helps you feel like you are handling the threat. This is the architectural genius of the whole system. A person who is simply avoiding something knows they are avoiding it. They feel the guilt, the stagnation, the uncomfortable awareness of a thing being left undone. But a person who is avoiding something through elaborate mental simulation does not feel like they are avoiding anything. They feel like they are working on it. They feel like they are taking it seriously. They feel like they are a person who is deeply engaged with their own life and psychology, carefully processing complex emotions, preparing thoughtfully before taking action. The avoidance has been disguised so completely that it has become indistinguishable from effort. Think about what this looks like in practice. The person who needs to have a difficult conversation with someone important to them. Instead of initiating that conversation, they spend 3 weeks imagining it. They run every possible version. They anticipate every response. They craft every counterargument. They process the emotional why, ghastly of the exchange so thoroughly inside their own mind that by the time 3 weeks have passed, they feel simultaneously exhausted from dealing with it and somehow resolved, as though the thing has already been handled. As though the relationship has already been addressed, even though not a single real word has been exchanged. The conversation never happens, but the avoidance never announced itself. It wore the costume of preparation so convincingly that the person inside the avoidance never saw it for what it was. This pattern scales across every domain of human experience. The business that never launches because the founder keeps refining the vision inside their head, feeling the genuine excitement of building something without ever placing a single brick in the real world. The relationship that never deepens because one person keeps having the emotional intimacy they need inside imagined conversations rather than vulnerable real ones. The creative work that never gets made because the artist has already experienced the satisfaction of completion in simulation, and the actual process of making with all its uncertainty and imperfection and exposure cannot compete with the clean, controlled version that lives in the imagination. Each of these is a different room in the same building. And the building was constructed not from weakness, but from intelligence, a sophisticated, adaptive, neurologically elegant response to a world that is genuinely uncertain, genuinely painful, and genuinely capable of causing real harm. The avoidance architecture is not the enemy of a capable mind. In most cases, it is the product of one. There is a currency your life runs on that nobody teaches you to track. Not money. Not time exactly, though time is part of it. It is something closer to presence, the finite, non-renewable resource of your actual conscious attention. The raw material from which every real relationship, every genuine achievement, every moment of authentic human experience is built, and you are spending it. Every hour, every day, in ways you have never been asked to account for, in ways that produce no return, no residue, no evidence that you were ever truly here. You are spending it inside a world that does not exist, on people who are not there, in conversations that will never happen, building a life that will never be lived, and the bill for all. L of that spending does not arrive in a single moment. It arrives slowly, quietly, in the form of everything that was supposed to be yours that somehow never materialized. This is the cost of living in your head, and it is higher than anyone wants to admit. The first thing you lose is time, but not in the way most people mean when they talk about wasted time. It is not simply the hours themselves that disappear. It is what those hours were supposed to contain. Every hour spent inside an elaborate mental simulation is an hour that was not spent building something real, saying something true, creating something that exists outside the boundaries of your own skull. And unlike money, unlike energy, unlike almost any other resource a human being consumes, time has no recovery mechanism. There is no way to go back and inhabit the hour you just spent rehearsing a conversation that never happened. That hour is structurally gone, and whatever it was supposed to build in the real world was never built. But the loss of time, as significant as it is not the deepest cost. The deeper cost is relational. And this one is almost completely invisible until the damage has already compounded beyond easy repair. When you are living primarily inside your head, your relationships exist in two parallel versions simultaneously. There is the real version, the actual person, with their actual complexity, their actual needs, their actual responses that you cannot script or control or predict. And there is the internal version, the character your mind has constructed from your assumptions, your fears, your projections, your needs, running on a loop inside your imagination, saying the things you need them to say, responding the way your psychology requires them to respond. And the longer you spend in relationship with the internal version, the less capacity you have for the real one. Real intimacy requires presence. It requires the willingness to sit with another person's actual reality without immediately filtering it through your own internal narrative. It requires the ability to be surprised, to be challenged, to encounter someone as they genuinely are, rather than as you have imagined them to be. But a mind that has been conditioned by thousands of hours of internal simulation develops a kind of relational impatience. Real people are too slow, too unpredictable, too inconsistent, content with the version that lives inside the imagination. Real conversations do not resolve cleanly. Real connection is not available on demand. And so the retreat happens not dramatically, not consciously, but steadily, and the people in your life begin to feel the distance without being able to name what is creating it. Then there is the cost to your sense of self-efficacy, your deep, lived belief in your own capacity to affect the real world. This one operates on a long timeline and arrives with devastating quietness. Self-efficacy is not built through thinking. It is not built through planning or imagining or mentally rehearsing. It is built exclusively through real-world action and its consequences. Every time you attempt something in reality and survive the outcome, your brain updates its model of what you are capable of. Every time you engage with genuine uncertainty and move through it, you become more confident in your abilities and your sense of self. Your nervous system builds a slightly more robust tolerance for the discomfort of being alive. But when the primary arena of your experience is internal, none of that updating happens. The real-world evidence base for your own capability stops accumulating. And without that accumulating evidence, the confidence required to take real action quietly erodes, making each subsequent retreat into fantasy feel not like a choice, but like a necessity. What remains, after years of this, is a person who is genuinely, achingly aware of the distance between where they are and where they were supposed to be, but who cannot clearly identify what created that distance, because the cost was never paid in a single catastrophic moment. It was paid in the smallest possible increments, across the smallest possible moments, in the invisible currency of a life that was present in body and absent in everything else. Everything that has been built can be rebuilt. Every pathway your brain has carved through years of retreat and simulation and internal theater is a pathway that was constructed by repetition, and what repetition builds, repetition can dismantle, not instantly, not painlessly, not through a single moment of insight or a motivational surge that burns bright for 72 hours and then dissolves back into the same patterns that were there before, but systematically, deliberately, through a process that works not against your neurology, but through it using the same mechanism. Mechanisms that built the avoidance architecture to construct something fundamentally different in its place. This is not about stopping the imagination. The imagination is not the enemy. The capacity to simulate, to project, to construct internal models of possible futures is one of the most sophisticated cognitive tools the human brain possesses. Every great builder, every person who has ever created something meaningful in the real world, used that capacity. The difference between the person whose imagination serves them and the person whose imagination consumes them is not the presence or absence of rich internal experience. It is the direction of the current. It is whether the simulation feeds back into reality or substitutes for it. The Rewire protocol is not about silencing the mind. It is about changing what the mind's activity produces. The first thing that must be understood about genuine neurological change is that insight alone does not produce it. You can understand everything that has been said across every keynote of this conversation, the dopamine mechanics, the identity erosion, the avoidance architecture, the compounding costs, and understand it completely, actually, with full cognitive clarity, and change absolutely nothing about your behavior. Because the brain does not rewire through understanding. It rewires through experience. Specifically, through repeated experience of doing the thing the old pattern was designed to prevent you from doing, and surviving it, and having your nervous system register that survival as data worth encoding. This means the protocol begins not in the mind, but in the body. Not in reflection, but in action. And critically, not in large dramatic action that requires the complete dismantling of everything the avoidance architecture was built to protect, but in small, precise, deliberately chosen moments of real engagement that are just uncomfortable enough to register as genuine, but not so overwhelming that the nervous system immediately shuts them down. The brain responds to graduated exposure. It responds to evidence accumulated incrementally. It responds to the consistent, repeated experience of moving toward discomfort and discovering that the discomfort did not destroy you. Each one of those experiences deposits something into a neurological account that, over time, begins to fund a fundamentally different relationship with reality. The second element of the protocol is interception, because the pattern does not announce itself. The retreat into fantasy happens faster than conscious awareness can track a flicker of discomfort, an automatic rerouting, and suddenly you are 3 minutes into an elaborate internal scenario before any part of your conscious mind registered the transition. Interception requires the development of a specific kind of self-awareness, not the broad reflective self-awareness of journaling or therapy, though those have their place, but a narrow, real-time sensitivity to the precise moment the imagination activates as a response to discomfort. The ability to catch the transition before it completes, to notice the pull toward the internal theater and, in that exact moment, redirect the energy outward rather than inward, not by suppressing the imagination, but by giving the nervous system a real-world action to perform before the simulation has time to generate its dopamine substitute. The third element is identity reconstruction. Because behavior change that is not supported by identity change will always be temporary. If the deep self-concept remains had of a person who imagines rather than acts, every behavioral intervention will eventually erode back toward the mean. Identity reconstruction happens the same way identity erosion happened gradually, through accumulated evidence, through the slow rewriting of the brain's internal model of who you are based on what you actually do. Every real conversation you initiate, every genuine risk you take, every moment you stay present in the friction and uncertainty of actual experience instead of retreating into the frictionless comfort of simulation is a data point. And data points, accumulated consistently over time, become the new story your brain tells about who you are. The rewire is not an event. It is not a revelation or a turning point or a single conversation that changes everything. It is a practice. It is the daily, unglamorous, profoundly ordinary work of choosing reality over simulation,